It began as a simple talk show, 2 Hollywood legends, 1 stage, and a million watching eyes. But when Will Smith tried to mock Keanu Reeves on live TV, everything changed. In that tense silence, Keanu spoke just one line, and what he said shattered Will, stunned the crowd, and changed the room forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The hum of the studio was alive long before the cameras rolled. Stagehands moved like shadows under the glare of backlights, fine-tuning every cable, every mark on the floor. The Midnight Exchange was no ordinary talk show. It was a weekly event, a cathedral of light and laughter where reputations were made, revived, or quietly destroyed. Tonight, that energy was doubled. 2 Hollywood icons, both larger than life in different ways, were about to share the same stage. The headline had been teased all week: Will Smith and Keanu Reeves face to face. Behind the curtain, Helena Cortez stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her earpiece. Her reflection didn't show nerves, but she felt them anyway. Helena had interviewed presidents, Nobel winners, and billionaires, but this felt different. The air was heavier, charged with something unpredictable. Will Smith was in his dressing room cracking jokes with the crew, his signature charisma filling the hallway. He was trying to keep things light, but beneath that charm was exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from being watched too long. Across the hall, Keanu Reeves sat alone. No entourage, no chatter, just quiet stillness. He wore black jeans, a simple blazer, and a silver chain that glinted under the low light. He wasn't reading, wasn't scrolling his phone. He just sat there, calm, grounded, as though he didn't belong to the same chaos that buzzed around him. One of the producers peeked in to check on him. Keanu smiled politely. "Everything's good," he said. That was all. His voice was low, kind, and unhurried, the opposite of the world waiting outside. When Helena entered the main stage, the set looked like something out of a dream. Glass panels glowed in hues of deep blue and gold, casting soft reflections across the floor. The air shimmered faintly from the heat of the lights. Cameras hovered like hawks in perfect balance, waiting for movement. The audience, already seated, was a sea of eager faces, fans, journalists, and executives, all packed into that glowing arena of performance. It was theater, disguised as conversation. In the control booth above, the director's voice crackled through the headset. 30 seconds to air. Cue Will's track on my mark. The familiar beat of Gettin' Jiggy Wit, it leaked faintly through the speakers, and the crowd responded with excitement. Will stepped into the wings, rolling his shoulders, exhaling through his nose like an athlete before a match. He flashed Helena a grin. "Let's give them a show," he said. She smiled, though something in her gut twisted. Will didn't say interview. He said show. The countdown began. In 5, 4, 3, the lights blazed white. Helena's voice cut through the applause, steady and confident. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very special night on the Midnight Exchange. Tonight, 2 legends share one stage. 2 men whose names have defined decades of cinema, and whose choices, words, and silences have shaped how we see them." The crowd erupted, and from that sound, the night began. Will Smith entered first, grinning as if the entire studio was an extension of his own living room. The audience stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some shouting his name. He soaked it in, waving broadly, cracking a smile so bright it could cut through fog. He walked with the rhythm of someone who'd been performing for a lifetime. A few quick steps, a finger point to the crowd, a light-hearted laugh. He hugged Helena briefly and dropped into the soft leather chair, set at an angle for intimacy. "Good to be here, Helena," he said, beaming. The crowd laughed, though he hadn't told a joke yet. That was the effect. He had people laughed simply because he existed in front of them. Helena smiled politely. "Always great to have you, Will. You've been busy as ever. New projects, family life, and somehow still finding time to inspire millions. "Yeah, I try," Will said with a mock sigh, leaning back. "You know, people keep saying slow down, but I don't know how. Still trying to catch up to Keanu over there." The audience laughed again. Helena tilted her head toward the wings. Speaking of which, our second guest is a man whose quiet presence speaks louder than most performances. He's been called a mystery, a poet in motion, and the most grounded man in Hollywood. Please welcome Keanu Reeves. The lights softened to a gentle gold, the music shifting to something more reflective, almost cinematic. Keanu stepped into view, slowly. No wave, no dance, just a nod of acknowledgement as the audience rose again in applause. His movements were measured, deliberate, each step quiet but certain. There was no showmanship, just presence. As he approached the chairs, Will stood up, grinning widely, and clapped for him, perhaps too enthusiastically. They shook hands firmly. The handshake lingered a second longer than expected, and something flickered between them, a moment of awareness. Will's grip was firm, but Keanu's calm didn't waver. "Good to see you, man," Will said loudly, the microphone catching every ounce of bravado. "You too, Will," Keanu replied softly. His tone was warm, not cold, but there was something about the stillness of his voice that made the room pause. The two sat across from each other, Helena between them. The small table that separated the chairs seemed almost symbolic, now a quiet line between two worlds. The set lights reflected faintly off the glass surface like ripples in water. Helena glanced from one man to the other, then to the audience. She could feel it. The atmosphere had changed. From the control room, the director muttered into his mic, "Do you feel that? It's like the air just thickened." Will adjusted in his seat, still smiling, but it felt more like armor now than ease. Keanu, by contrast, rested his hands loosely on his knees, eyes steady, posture unforced. For a moment, no one spoke. The applause had faded, but something heavier remained, a hush charged with curiosity and tension. And though the interview hadn't even begun, everyone in that studio could feel it. Something unscripted was about to happen. Helena leaned slightly forward, her practiced smile steady, but her pulse quickened beneath her composure. "Gentlemen," she began, "the world is watching tonight. Two men who've shaped culture in their own ways. Will, the master of charisma. Keanu, the quiet philosopher of Hollywood." The crowd laughed softly, but no one could ignore the contrast laid bare on stage. Will nodded, lifting his glass of water from the table. "You know, Helena, I've been wanting to do this for a while. Keanu here," he gestured lightly with his hand. "He's one of those guys who somehow manages to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Man doesn't post, doesn't brag, doesn't even try, and people love him for it." A ripple of laughter followed. Keanu smiled faintly, not defensive, not amused, just calm. "Maybe they're tired of noise," he said softly. The audience went silent. The words were simple, but they landed like a pin drop on marble. Helena blinked, feeling the tension shift again, almost imperceptibly. Will chuckled to cover it. "Oh, they'll get noise tonight," he said playfully, but his tone carried something else, a hint of challenge. From the audience's perspective, it looked friendly enough, but to Helena, who had built a career reading people, it wasn't friendly. It was friction dressed as humor. She saw it in Will's eyes, curiosity mixed with discomfort. He'd faced controversy, mockery, redemption, all under the spotlight. But Keanu represented something he couldn't define, a man who didn't need to explain himself to be understood. The band music swelled faintly as the show shifted into its first topic. A screen behind them flashed highlights of both men's careers, movie montages, applause reels, a reminder of their shared dominance over decades. The audience clapped again, but their attention was no longer on the screen. It was locked on the space between the two men. Will glanced sideways as the lights dimmed slightly. Keanu sat unmoving, eyes lowered, expression thoughtful. Will broke the silence again, forcing a laugh. "Man, you're too calm. I don't know if that's peace or just good acting." Keanu looked up, his expression unreadable. "Maybe both," he said quietly. "Or maybe peace starts when you stop acting." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Helena smiled quickly, trying to ease the weight in the air. "Well, I can already tell this conversation's going to be different." Will leaned back, his smile returning, though tighter now. "Different's good," he said. "Keeps things real." "Real," Keanu echoed. The words slow, deliberate. "That's what people come here for, right?" Helena nodded, caught off guard by how natural his tone sounded. The camera zoomed in on their faces. Will's eyes gleamed with charm, Keanu's with quiet knowing. The show had barely started, but already it felt like something deeper was unfolding, something unscripted, fragile, and dangerous. The applause faded into a warm hum as Helena leaned forward with her practiced smile. "Let's start light," she said, her tone playful. "You've both been in this business for decades. Between blockbuster hits, awards, and the changes in Hollywood, how has fame changed for you?" "Fame? Oh, fame's like a high school crush that won't stop calling," he said, earning a burst of laughter from the crowd. "At first you chase it, then you realize it's a little crazy, but you keep answering anyway." The audience clapped. Some whistled, enjoying the rhythm of his delivery. Will knew how to play them. His voice rose and dipped like music. His hands animated every word. Helena smiled. "That's one way to put it. What about you, Keanu? How do you see fame?" Keanu paused before answering, his hands resting calmly on his lap. "Fame," he said softly, "is an echo. You can enjoy the sound, but you have to remember, it's not the source." The audience quieted, then erupted in applause, louder than before. Helena's eyebrows lifted slightly. Will chuckled, masking the flicker of tension crossing his face. "Man, you don't even have to try, do you?" Will said, grinning wide. The audience laughed again, sensing humor but missing the sharpness under the words. Keanu tilted his head, smiling politely. "Sometimes, trying too hard makes us forget why we began." That landed differently. The audience didn't laugh this time. They murmured, impressed, reflective. A few clapped slowly, as though digesting a line of poetry rather than banter. Helena stepped in, keeping the flow. "You both started from humble beginnings. Will, you came from music and comedy. Keanu, from theater and small films. What drives you now?" Will's grin returned. "I guess the same thing that always did. I like making people feel something. Laughter, excitement, maybe a little chaos." He winked, earning more cheers. Keanu nodded slightly, thoughtful. "For me, it's stories that heal. I like projects that make people remember their humanity." Helena leaned closer, intrigued. "Stories that heal, that's beautiful. Do you feel Hollywood gives enough space for that?" Keanu's gaze met hers. Hollywood gives space to what sells. Healing doesn't always trend. A ripple moved through the audience again. Half admiration, half silence. Will glanced at him, then at the crowd. "Well, I don't know about that," he said quickly. "My last movie healed a lot of wallets. Laughter broke the tension again, but it felt thinner this time." Helena smiled, though she felt the current shifting beneath their words. The conversation had barely begun, but something deeper was already stirring. An invisible tug between noise and stillness, between applause and silence. Helena sensed the energy tilting and decided to keep it steady. "You both represent two sides of Hollywood," she said with a diplomatic tone. "Will, you bring energy, this infectious joy that lights up every room. Keanu, you bring peace, this quiet strength that people find grounding. Do you think those two approaches can coexist?" Will smiled smoothly. "I think they have to. The world needs both fireworks and candles, right?" The audience laughed and clapped. "You can't meditate through every storm. Sometimes you've got to dance in the rain." Keanu nodded slowly. "True," he said. "But sometimes the rain isn't there to be danced in. Sometimes it's there to wash something away." The laughter stopped. The audience's attention narrowed, caught by the quiet honesty in his tone. Keanu wasn't trying to be profound, but that's how it came across. It always did. Will chuckled again, masking a trace of unease. "Man, you sound like a monk with a scriptwriter." Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe I just learned to listen more than I speak. Helena intervened. Listening now, that's rare in our business. Keanu gave a small nod. It's harder than talking. The crowd responded with another wave of applause. It was warm, genuine. Will clapped too, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else. Resentment, curiosity, maybe both. He wasn't used to sharing a stage where his charisma wasn't the loudest force in the room. So, Keanu, Will began, leaning forward, you've got this reputation, man. Everyone says you're the nicest guy in Hollywood. But come on, there's got to be something that gets under your skin. The audience chuckled. Helena smiled, but her eyes sharpened slightly, sensing the question's edge. Keanu thought for a moment. Cruelty, he said softly. It always hurts, even when it's not directed at you. I think that's what breaks people in this business, how easily kindness gets mistaken for weakness. The room went still again. The words hung in the air like incense. Will shifted, caught between admiration and irritation. I mean, that's deep, man, he said with a forced laugh. But sometimes you gotta show a little edge. That's what keeps people listening. Keanu's expression didn't change. Maybe listening doesn't need noise. That line struck like quiet lightning. The audience stirred, murmurs spreading through the rows. Helena's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was turning into something raw, something real. Will laughed again, louder than before, but this time, it didn't reach his eyes. You sure you don't write your own fortune cookies? Keanu smiled again, small and disarming. No, he said. I just stopped chasing applause long enough to hear what silence had to say. The audience didn't laugh or clap this time. They just listened. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that comes right before something irreversible happens. Helena tried to steady the mood again, though her voice carried a tremor of awe. You both speak about life in such different ways, she said gently. Will, you've talked about energy, about connecting with people. Keanu, you speak about stillness, about reflection. What do you think people are truly searching for today? Will was quick to answer. Connection, he said confidently. People want to be seen. They want to feel alive. You make them laugh, you make them cry, and they remember you. That's what it's all about. He turned slightly to the audience, who responded with approving applause. I mean, if we're not giving the people something to feel, then what's the point? Helena nodded. And Keanu? Keanu's pause was long enough for the room to fall silent again. I think people want peace, he said. But we confuse peace with comfort. Peace isn't always easy. It's the space where you stop pretending. The crowd stirred again. The words lingered. Helena blinked slowly, absorbing them, but Will was already leaning forward. See, that's where you lose me, he said with a half smile. If you stop pretending, you lose the magic. Acting is pretending. Entertainment is pretending. The whole business is built on it. Keanu's gaze didn't move. Pretending can tell the truth, he said, but living behind it can't. Will hesitated, his practiced rhythm faltering for the first time. So you're saying you don't act? I act, Keanu replied. But when the cameras turn off, I stop performing. It was subtle, but the audience felt the air shift again. They could sense Will absorbing it, perhaps feeling the sting beneath the calm delivery. Will laughed lightly, though his tone had hardened. Man, you've got all these one-liners ready. You sure you're not just rehearsed in wisdom? Keanu tilted his head slightly. Wisdom's just what's left after the noise burns out. A low hum passed through the audience, half admiration, half disbelief. Helena watched them closely, realizing something extraordinary was happening. Every answer Keanu gave seemed to peel another, layer off the conversation, while every joke from Will tried unsuccessfully to cover it back up. The producer in the control room whispered to his assistant, "This is gold. Don't cut. Let it run." Helena took a breath, eyes shifting between them. So maybe, she said softly, what we're really watching isn't an interview at all. Maybe it's two philosophies colliding. Will looked at Keanu with a grin that no longer felt effortless. I guess we'll see which one survives the night. Keanu nodded gently. Maybe neither needs to. That final line brought another stillness to the room. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay quiet. But they all knew one thing. Something far deeper than entertainment had just begun. The audience laughed softly at the last exchange, still unsure whether to take it as humor or tension. Helena smiled for the cameras, but she could feel the subtle current running between the two men, one pushing, the other absorbing. It wasn't hostility, not yet, but it carried that quiet pulse that made people lean in. Will leaned forward in his chair, elbows resting on his knees, the playful grin still there but tighter now. "You ever wonder," he began, his tone deceptively casual, "if you could have been bigger, Keanu? I mean like A-list massive. Maybe if you weren't so slow, so quiet?" The laughter in the audience stopped instantly. The shift was so sudden that the sound engineer instinctively pulled the crowd mic back. Helena froze, her eyes flicking toward the control booth, but no one said a word. Cameras zoomed in on the two faces, the spark and the stillness. Keanu didn't blink. He didn't frown. He simply looked at Will, calm, grounded, unmoving. His quiet was heavier than anger could have been. For a second, it felt as if the entire studio was holding its breath. "What you call slow," Keanu said finally, his tone even, "I call present." The silence that followed was electric. You could hear someone cough in the back row. Even the stage lights seemed to soften, as though listening too. Will forced a laugh, waving his hand. "That's deep, man. Real deep. But come on, let's be real. Hollywood doesn't pay for present. It pays for performance." He straightened up, smiling wide again. "You stop performing, you disappear. Simple as that." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his eyes never breaking contact. "And what happens," he said, "when the performance ends?" The question hit harder than any insult could. Helena felt it. The crowd felt it. Even Will did, though he tried to hide it behind another quick grin. He tapped his knee, pretending to shrug it off. "Man, you always do that," he said with a half laugh. "You take a simple question and turn it into a philosophy class." Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe that's because some simple questions deserve real answers. A few people in the audience clapped nervously, unsure whether they were witnessing tension or transformation. Helena finally spoke, her voice softer now. Let's talk about that. The idea of performance. Will, do you think your public image, what you give the world, is a kind of character?" Will chuckled, running a hand through his hair. "A character? No, that's just me. Maybe a louder version, sure, but me. People love that energy. It's what they expect." Keanu looked down briefly, then back up. "And if one day they stop expecting it?" The crowd stirred again, that strange hush returning. Helena could almost feel hearts beating in the silence. Will chuckled again, though this time it sounded forced. "If they stop expecting it, I'll give them something new," he said, snapping his fingers. "That's the job. Reinvention. Keep them entertained. Keep them guessing. That's what separates survivors from has-beens." Keanu nodded slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Or maybe survival isn't about reinvention," he said. "Maybe it's about authenticity," the crowd murmured. Helena's eyes darted between them. She'd hosted hundreds of interviews, but never one that walked such a fine line between showmanship and self-exposure. Will leaned back, shaking his head. "See, that's the thing, man. You can afford to talk like that. You're mysterious. You vanish for 5 years. Come back. Everyone's still in love with you. Me? I disappear for 5 minutes, and they say I fell off." A quiet wow slipped from somewhere in the audience. It wasn't a mock, it was realization. Keanu's eyes softened. "That sounds exhausting," he said quietly. Will laughed, but it didn't land this time. "Yeah, well, welcome to the real world." "The real world?" Keanu asked calmly. "You mean the one where everything depends on applause?" The audience stirred again, whispers rippling like wind through leaves. The question hung there, heavy and echoing. Will looked away for a second, then back at Keanu. "You make it sound like I'm addicted to it." Keanu didn't flinch. "Aren't we all?" he said softly. "The difference is whether we hear silence as punishment or peace." Helena's breath caught, and a low murmur spread through the room. One woman in the front row mouthed, "Wow." Will rubbed his chin, smirking to mask his unease. "You've got a way with words, I'll give you that. But let me tell you, silence doesn't pay the bills. Silence doesn't put food on the table." Keanu nodded. "Maybe not, but neither does losing yourself trying to feed everyone else." For the first time, Will had no immediate comeback. He leaned back, exhaling, eyes narrowing slightly as if studying Keanu more deeply now. The smile was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger, but recognition. Helena broke the stillness, trying to ease the tension. "You both represent success in different ways," she said carefully. "Maybe that's what's fascinating to people, two paths to the same mountain." Will smirked faintly. "Yeah, except one of us climbed it with fireworks, and the other with meditation." Keanu smiled, and maybe both reached the same view. The audience laughed softly, but it was no longer the easy laughter of entertainment. It was nervous, reflective, almost reverent. Will shook his head slowly, half smiling. "You really think calm beats charisma?" Keanu's answer came without hesitation. "I think truth always does." The silence after that wasn't awkward, it was arresting. Camera zoomed in close, capturing Will's faint smirk, dissolving into thought. For once, there was nothing to hide behind. The tension in the room had shifted from entertaining to intimate. The audience could feel it. The crew could feel it. Even Helena's professional calm was cracking beneath the quiet weight of what was unfolding. This wasn't a talk show anymore. It was an unmasking. Will sat still for a moment, his eyes flicking toward the cameras, then back to Keanu. The usual sparkle of control in his gaze was dimmer now, replaced by something raw, something questioning. He leaned in again, elbows on his knees, voice lower, quieter, but sharper too. "You really think you've got it figured out, don't you? Just sit back, stay silent, and let the world come to you. Must be nice being Hollywood's philosopher." Keanu's lips curved slightly. "No one has it figured out," he said. "I just stopped pretending that I do." That reply landed harder than any insult could. Helena glanced briefly at her notes, then back at them, knowing none of her prepared questions mattered anymore. Will exhaled, a trace of bitterness creeping into his tone. "Man, you talk like someone who's above it all. Like you don't care about the game. But you're still here, aren't you? Still doing interviews? Still in front of the cameras?" "You play it too." Keanu nodded slowly. "I'm not above it," he said. "I just stopped mistaking the game for my purpose." That line stirred something deep. The audience didn't know how to respond. A few people shifted in their seats. Some glanced at each other, unsure whether they were witnessing conflict or revelation. Will tried to laugh, but his voice cracked slightly. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," Keanu said. "It's just honest." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Even Helena stayed quiet, her pen resting still in her hand. The set lights buzzed softly overhead, the cameras rolling on the most genuine silence television had seen in years. Finally, Will spoke again, his voice low. "You know what, man? You're right about one thing. It's exhausting. Everyone wants a piece of you. The crowd, the press, the family, the whole world. You give and give until there's nothing left. Then you still have to smile." Keanu's expression softened. "That's the danger," he said. "You start performing survival instead of living it." Will stared at him, visibly shaken by how easily those words mirrored his own truth. The audience could feel something changing, not just on stage, but inside the man they'd come to watch. Keanu leaned slightly forward, voice quiet, but resolute. "When the performance ends, Will, what's left?" Will didn't answer. The applause that should have come never did. The silence was louder than thunder. In that breathless moment, Helena finally looked into the camera, her voice trembling with wonder. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think tonight we've just stepped out of Hollywood and into humanity." The silence stretched long enough for Helena to sense the need to intervene. She cleared her throat, forcing a smile as she shuffled her cue cards. "All right," she said, her tone warm, rehearsed. "Let's take a breath, gentlemen. I think the audience is on the edge of their seats." A few nervous laughs rose from the crowd, but it wasn't enough to reset the mood. Something had changed in the air. Something too honest to go back from. Will leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "Nah, let's not move on yet," he said, waving a hand. "We're finally getting somewhere real." His grin returned, but it was thinner now, more defensive. "You know what gets me, Keanu? I had to fight for everything I have. Every laugh, every cheer, every ounce of love. I earned it. You just stand there, say 5 words, and people act like you're some kind of monk who descended from the clouds." A murmur spread through the audience. Helena's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. The camera zoomed in on Will's face, the edges of his smile starting to tremble. Keanu didn't flinch. "Maybe they're not worshiping me," he said quietly. "Maybe they see themselves in the silence I leave." The audience reacted, a low hum of agreement sweeping through the rows. Some clapped softly, others just nodded, unsure why the line hit them so deeply. Will frowned, his hands clasping together. "See, that's what I'm talking about," he said, forcing a chuckle. "You drop one sentence and suddenly it's scripture. Meanwhile, I talk for 20 minutes and people just meme it." Keanu's smile was small, patient. "Words are easy to fill," he said. "Silence is harder to hold." Helena's pen froze midair. The studio had gone still again. Will leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his tone sharper now. "You know, man, you've built this image, this whole mysterious, humble, monk-like thing, and people eat it up. They think you're deep because you don't talk. They think I'm shallow because I do." Keanu's gaze was steady, compassionate but unyielding. "Maybe it's not about who talks more," he said. "Maybe it's about what's left after the talking stops." The audience gasped again, though quietly this time. They weren't watching a debate anymore. They were watching something unravel. Helena smiled weakly at the camera. "This is quite a conversation," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But maybe that's what art does. It reveals." Will looked at her, then back at Keanu. His grin was gone now. "Yeah," he said softly. "Reveals what we don't want to see." Will leaned back, folding his arms, trying to mask his discomfort with a smirk. "You make it sound easy, man. Just sit in silence, be mysterious, and suddenly the world thinks you've reached enlightenment. But some of us have to work for it." He laughed dryly. "You don't get to be the quiet saint, while the rest of us bleed for attention." The audience murmured again, uneasy. They weren't sure if this was still friendly banter or something far more personal. Helena's heart rate quickened. She knew this was crossing into unscripted territory, the kind that producers love but hosts fear. Keanu's face remained composed. "I don't think silence makes me a saint," he said evenly. "It just reminds me to listen before I speak." Will's brow furrowed. "Yeah, but listening doesn't sell tickets. Energy does. Performance does. People want to feel like they're part of something alive. You just," he gestured vaguely toward Keanu, "sit there and they project whatever they want onto you. It's effortless." Keanu shook his head slightly. "It's not effortless," he said. "It's just honest. I stopped performing for approval a long time ago." That answer struck Will harder than he expected. He blinked, his expression shifting, the mask of humor slipping. "Approval, huh? You think I do this for approval?" Keanu's tone didn't change. "I think you've given the world so much energy that you forgot to keep some for yourself." The audience's reaction was soft, almost reverent. Helena exhaled quietly, sensing how every sentence was peeling another layer off both men. Will rubbed his temples, forcing a small laugh. "Man, you talk like you're in therapy." Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe that's what this is." That earned an honest laugh from the crowd. But even in the laughter, there was empathy. Everyone could feel the vulnerability seeping through Will's polished surface. Helena decided to gently re-enter the conversation. "Will, you've always been known for connecting with your audience, your openness, your humor. Do you think that's ever been a burden?" Will took a breath, his voice lower now. "A burden?" he said slowly. "Maybe. You spend your whole life making people smile, and sometimes you start wondering if they'd still love you if you stopped." The audience fell silent again. Keanu's gaze softened. "That's a question I've asked myself too," he said. "Not about love from others, but from myself." Will looked at him, his smile gone entirely now. "So, what'd you find?" Keanu hesitated for a long moment before answering. "That peace doesn't come from applause. It comes from stillness, the kind that doesn't need an audience." The crowd erupted in quiet clapping this time, slow and emotional. Helena blinked away the moisture building in her eyes. Will didn't clap. He just stared, realizing that for the first time in years, someone had answered him without trying to win. The silence between them grew longer now, not awkward, but charged with meaning. The audience sensed that something fragile and real was taking shape on that stage. Helena didn't interrupt. She let it breathe, even as her producer whispered through the earpiece, urging her to change topics. She ignored him. Moments like this didn't come twice. Will leaned forward again, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly. "You know, man," he said quietly. "I used to think being loved was proof that I mattered, that the noise meant something." He looked at the floor for a moment, then at Keanu. "But sometimes, after the lights go out, it just feels empty, like the crowd took everything with them." Keanu nodded slowly. "Because applause doesn't stay," he said. "It fades, even when it's loud. What matters is what's left when it does." The audience sat in stillness, listening. Even the sound of breathing seemed too loud for that room. Will exhaled deeply. "So, what's left for you, Keanu? You've lost people. You've been through pain. You've seen fame, heartbreak, everything. When it all fades, what's left?" Keanu's eyes lifted toward him, calm but deep, reflecting the light like water. "Presence," he said softly, "and gratitude, because even pain can teach you to see clearly." Will tilted his head. "You really believe that? That pain makes you grateful?" "Yes," Keanu said, "because it strips away everything that isn't real. And when all that's gone, what's left is truth." Helena swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her pen. There were tears in some of the audience members' eyes, now grown adults, sitting in silence as two men peeled back the layers of fame and ego until all that remained was honesty. Will looked at him, his voice trembling slightly. "You talk like you've already made peace with the whole world." Keanu shook his head gently. "No, I just stopped fighting with it." That line hit the air like a quiet revelation. The audience didn't applaud this time. They just sat there, staring, because something in them recognized the truth of it. Will smiled faintly, the first genuine smile of the night. "You ever get tired of being right?" Keanu chuckled softly. "All the time. But I'm not right. I just stopped running." The moment hung there, delicate and human. Then Will leaned back in his chair, exhaling through a shaky laugh. "You know, man, this was supposed to be an interview." Keanu's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe it still is. Just not the kind we expected." Helena finally broke the silence, her voice trembling with sincerity. "Maybe that's what makes it worth watching." The lights above flickered faintly as the camera zoomed in, capturing two men who had just stripped the glamour from fame and found something truer beneath it, a mirror neither expected to face. The lights above the stage softened, as if the room itself sensed the shift in tone. What had started as a conversation about fame had turned into something else entirely, something raw and unpredictable. The crowd's laughter was gone now, replaced by a silence that seemed to listen on its own. Helena glanced toward the camera crew. No one moved, no one dared. Keanu looked across at Will, studying him for a moment. Then, with a calmness that seemed almost sacred, he asked, "Will, why did you want this interview?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Ripples of surprise moved through the audience. Will blinked, taken off guard. "What? Ma'am, it's a talk show. Come on, two legends, one stage. It's good TV." He forced a laugh, gesturing to the crowd. "Look at them, they love it." Keanu didn't smile. "Or maybe you needed to confront something." Will froze, the grin flickering for just a second before returning, though thinner now. "Confront what, exactly?" he asked, his voice edged with nervous laughter. Keanu's tone stayed level, almost too gentle. "Yourself," the crowd murmured softly, a wave of hushed reactions spreading across the seats. Helena's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. This wasn't a question for the show. This was something deeper, something people might remember for years. Will leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs to regain composure. "You think you know me?" he asked, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "No," Keanu said quietly. "I think you're still trying to know yourself." The silence that followed felt different. No longer a pause, but a mirror. The audience sat completely still, caught between fascination and unease. It wasn't entertainment anymore, it was exposure. Will looked down at his hands, then back at Keanu. "You're digging deep for a talk show, man," he said with a forced grin. "You trying to psychoanalyze me on national TV?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "No. I just think sometimes we don't realize how much of ourselves we hide until someone stops playing along." That line hit like quiet thunder. Helena felt her throat tighten. She'd seen hundreds of interviews, none like this. Will tried to regain control, sitting straighter. "Look, I just thought it'd be interesting. Two completely different guys, different lives, different philosophies. That's all. People love a contrast." Keanu tilted his head. "Or maybe you needed one." The air grew dense again. Will frowned, not angry but exposed. The laughter that once protected him was gone, replaced by something much harder to manage: truth. Will's leg bounced slightly, a small sign of tension that the camera caught in close-up. He tried to hide it by shifting in his chair, forcing a smirk. "Man, you're good," he said lightly. "You've got people thinking this is therapy, not television." The crowd chuckled, but it was uneasy laughter, the kind that filled silence rather than broke it. Keanu didn't look away. "Maybe it's both," he said calmly. "Television can show a lot of things, movies, laughter, stories, but maybe tonight it's showing a mirror." Helena glanced at her cue cards, realizing there was no way to steer this back to her notes. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than her script. She leaned slightly forward, her voice low. "A mirror for who?" Keanu's eyes stayed on Will. "For all of us," he said, then paused. "But maybe especially for him." Will laughed again, too quickly this time. "So now I'm the project, huh? The broken guy to fix?" He shook his head. "Look, Keanu, I respect what you're doing. You've got your peace, your quiet thing. But not everyone has that luxury. Some of us have to fight to stay standing." "I know," Keanu said softly. "I've fought too. The difference is, I stopped swinging at shadows." The crowd gasped slightly, the weight of the line sinking in. Will's smile faltered, the humor fading like a light losing power. "And you think I'm fighting shadows?" Keanu didn't answer right away. His silence said more than words could. "Finally," he said, "I think sometimes the loudest battles are the ones we fight inside." The words seemed to echo in Will's expression. His eyes lowered, his jaw tightened. For a fleeting second, his polished mask cracked, revealing exhaustion beneath. Helena broke the stillness gently. "Will, is that true for you? The idea of fighting battles inside?" Will took a breath, then chuckled, though his voice was softer now. "Yeah," he said. "I guess it is. But the thing is, people don't care about your battles. They just want the show. You give them the show, they love you. You stop, they move on." Keanu's gaze was compassionate. "Maybe they don't move on," he said. "Maybe they just wait for you to come back real." Will blinked, processing it. The words struck somewhere deeper than pride could protect. He leaned back, silent for once, staring at the floor as if something in him was beginning to unravel. The crowd didn't applaud, they just watched. And Helena, sitting between them, could only think one thing. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't performance anymore. It was confession. For a long time, no one said a word. The silence was thick, but not uncomfortable, more like a pause that demanded honesty. Helena's hand rested near her microphone, but she didn't speak. She knew interrupting now would break something sacred that was forming in front of everyone's eyes. Will finally exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You really think I came here for that?" he said quietly. "To get real on national television?" Keanu's tone was gentle. "Maybe not. Maybe it just found you." Will laughed softly, but the sound was hollow. "Man, I didn't plan on having a therapy session in front of millions of people. Maybe that's why it's real," Keanu said. "The truth doesn't wait for permission." The audience shifted, drawn in closer without moving an inch. They could feel the tension transforming into something more human, something that felt like shared vulnerability. Will looked at Keanu with a faint smirk, but his eyes gave him away. "You're good with words, man. Too good. You make everything sound peaceful, like life's some meditation retreat. But for some of us, peace feels like surrender." Keanu nodded slowly. "It used to feel that way for me too," he said. "But then I realized peace isn't giving up, it's stopping the fight you've already lost." Will stared at him for a moment, his jaw tightening. What if stopping feels like falling apart? Then maybe falling apart, Keanu said softly, is just how you finally make space for yourself. The words landed like a whisper, yet they filled the entire studio. You could see it in the audience's faces. They weren't just watching anymore. They were feeling. Will blinked hard, his gaze wandering off as if trying to find refuge in the lights above. "You know what, man?" he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I thought I came here to show people who you really were. I thought if I poked hard enough, I'd make you break. But now, I think you're the one breaking me." Keanu didn't smile, didn't gloat. His expression stayed calm, full of quiet empathy. "Maybe you're not breaking," he said. "Maybe you're just opening." The audience sat frozen. Helena's hand trembled slightly against her cue card, the ink smudged under her fingertips. Will's voice was barely above a whisper now. "You ever look in the mirror and not recognize the guy staring back?" Keanu nodded. "Every day," he said. "Until I stopped asking who he was and started asking what he needed." Will looked up slowly, something fragile flickering in his eyes. "And what did he need?" Keanu answered, his voice steady as a heartbeat. "Stillness, forgiveness, presence." For the first time that night, Will didn't reply. He just sat there, breathing, finally silent. Will straightened, the muscles in his jaw tightening as if he were bracing for a punch that never came. His voice rose without warning, sharp enough to slice the hush that had settled over the room. "You act like you've got it all figured out," he snapped. "Like silence makes you holy." Keanu didn't move. He didn't retreat or advance. He simply breathed, steady as a metronome. "Silence doesn't make anyone holy," he answered. "It just makes room for honesty." A low ripple moved through the audience. The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of something people recognized and rarely said aloud. Will laughed, but there was no joy in it, only friction. Honesty? His head tilted, eyes bright with wounded pride. "My whole life's been public. You hide behind mystery. I take hits in front of the world." Keanu's gaze held him, unwavering. "And that's what makes you brave," he said. "But maybe you confuse noise with connection." Will blinked. The comeback he reached for wasn't there. The smile he wore as armor loosened around the edges. For the briefest moment, he looked lost, like a man who had sprinted through years and realized he didn't know the street he was on. Helena didn't interrupt. She saw the shift from stage to soul and kept the space open. The cameras drifted closer on silent tracks, catching the fine details, Will's fingers flexing, the tension in his shoulders, the quiet steadiness in Keanu's eyes. The audience leaned forward, a single organism holding one collective breath. It no longer felt like a show. It felt like a reckoning between two ways of being. Will found his voice again, lower now, roughened by something that wasn't anger. "You don't get what it costs," he said. "To be the guy people expect. To show up big, even when you're empty." "I know empty," Keanu replied. "I just stopped filling it with applause." The room tightened around that line. Will's gaze flicked to the crowd, then back. Habit tugged him toward a joke, a quip to break the tension and win the room back. He didn't take the exit. He stayed. "You keep talking about stillness like it's some cure," he said, quieter. "But stillness looks like failure when the world is watching." "Stillness looks like failure to the noise," Keanu said. "To the truth, it looks like oxygen." A soft gasp rolled across the first few rows. Helena pressed her lips together, fighting the instinct to smooth everything over. She saw it clearly now. This wasn't about careers or box office or the machinery of fame. It was about identity. What survives when the spotlights switch off? What remains when the performance ends? Will held Keanu's eyes, searching for any hint of superiority, and finding none. Only presence, only room. The fight in his shoulders softened a notch. "And if I don't know how to breathe without the noise?" he asked. "Then we learn here," Keanu said, "while the world is listening." No one clapped. No one spoke. The moment didn't need applause. It needed silence, and it had it. The audience sat frozen, aware they were witnessing something no scriptwriter could have designed. Every eye was on Will and Keanu, two men, two worlds, and one truth unraveling between them. Will leaned back, his face half shadowed by the stage lights. His voice came out lower, stripped of the usual smoothness. "You talk like you found peace in losing everything," he said. "But some of us don't get to disappear. We fall, and everyone watches. There's no hiding from that." Keanu nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "You can't hide. But maybe it's not about hiding. Maybe it's about choosing what parts of yourself the sewed world doesn't get to take." Will's eyes narrowed. "And you think silence protects that?" "Sometimes," Keanu replied. "Silence isn't escape, it's a boundary. It's where you stop performing and start listening." Helena glanced between them, her voice a whisper. "Listening to what?" Keanu's gaze didn't leave Will. "To the part of you that still remembers who you were before they started clapping." The line landed like a heartbeat. The audience didn't move. You could almost hear the tension vibrate through the air. Will exhaled sharply, running a hand across his face. "Man, I've been in this game for 30 years. Every move, every word picked apart, praised, then torn down again. You learn to talk loud enough that nobody notices when your voice shakes." Keanu's voice softened. "And does it stop shaking when the applause fades?" Will looked at him, startled by the question. His mouth opened, then closed again. The crowd leaned closer, not wanting to miss a word. He laughed, but it was broken now. An echo of his usual charm. "You think I'm afraid of silence? I live in it after every show, after every interview. I walk off stage and it's just me and the quiet that never stops asking what's left." Keanu's eyes softened. "Then you already know what I'm talking about." For a long beat, the only sound was the soft hum of the lights above them. Even Helena's breathing was audible in her mic. Will looked at Keanu again, his expression gentler now. "You really think I'm lost, don't you?" Keanu shook his head. "No. I think you're tired of pretending you're not." That broke something in the room. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't even move. They just sat in stillness, as if the two men on stage were saying what everyone else had been too afraid to admit, that sometimes the hardest fight isn't for fame or love or even forgiveness. It's for peace with yourself. Will's hands tightened on his knees as he stared at the floor. His usual brightness had faded, replaced by something raw, something closer to truth. "You know what's funny?" he said quietly. "I've spent half my life proving I belong in rooms like this. I thought if I talked loud enough, smiled big enough, people would stop seeing the cracks." He looked up, meeting Keanu's calm gaze. "But they don't stop, do they? They just get quieter until you're the only one who hears them." Keanu nodded gently. "The cracks don't mean you're broken," he said. They mean the light's trying to get in. The audience sighed softly. The words landed with the weight of grace. Will blinked, his throat tightening. You make it sound beautiful, he said. But when you're the one falling apart, it doesn't feel like light. It feels like failure. Keanu leaned forward slightly. Maybe failure isn't the opposite of success. Maybe it's the moment success stops being the mask. Helena's eyes glistened. She didn't dare speak. She could feel the invisible pull of every heart in the room moving closer to this fragile exchange. Will laughed under his breath, though it trembled at the edges. You ever wonder why people love you so much? You barely say a word, and they hang on every syllable. Meanwhile, I talk for hours, and people only hear the noise. Maybe, Keanu said softly, they're not listening for me. Maybe they're listening through me. Will frowned. Through you? Keanu nodded. Sometimes when you stop trying to be heard, people finally hear themselves. The audience murmured a low emotional sound that wasn't applause, wasn't cheering, just the collective release of something understood too well. Will leaned back, his voice trembling but steady. So what, man? I'm the noise and you're the echo? Keanu's eyes softened again. No, he said. You're the music. You just forgot to listen to your own song. Will looked away, blinking fast. His voice came out lower now, almost a whisper. You really think I can still hear it? Yes, Keanu said, but only when the crowd stops singing over it. Helena swallowed hard. Her notes were useless now. Nothing could compete with the truth happening right in front of her. Will gave a small, genuine laugh, the first one that felt real all night. Man, he said, I came here thinking I'd challenge you, maybe even embarrass you. Now, I feel like I'm the one being seen for the first time. Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe that's what mirrors do. They don't attack. They just reflect what's already there. Will looked down, exhaling slowly. Guess I didn't expect to see this much. The crowd remained silent, respectful, as if speaking might shatter the fragile honesty in the air. The silence in the studio stretched again, long enough for Helena to realize that something irreversible had already shifted. What had begun as tension had turned into truth, and everyone could feel it. She glanced at Keanu, who sat with that same composed stillness that seemed to command the air itself. Then, softly, she asked the question that had been waiting between every word. Keanu, she said, her voice gentle, you seem comfortable with silence. Has it always been that way? Keanu's eyes lifted slightly, his expression thoughtful, distant. No, he said quietly. It wasn't always that way. He paused, drawing a slow breath. I learned it after losing people I loved. My sister, River, friends who never got another sunrise. The audience went completely still. No whisper, no cough, no shuffle of a shoe. Will looked at him, the usual bravado gone from his face. His eyes softened, the weight of the confession touching something raw inside him. Keanu continued, his tone calm, but carrying an ache underneath. There was a time when I couldn't stand the quiet. After my sister got sick, after River was gone, it felt like silence was mocking me. Every sound stopped, and I was left with the echo of everything I'd lost. I wanted something that drowned out the pain. Helena swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. So what changed? Keanu looked toward the audience, his gaze steady but reflective. One night I realized I wasn't running from the silence anymore. I was running from what it was trying to tell me. So I stopped. I disappeared for a while, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't breathe. Will's eyes lowered. His fingers traced the armrest, the same restless energy replaced now with quiet empathy. Keanu's voice deepened, soft but resonant. Grief makes you quiet. It empties you. But when the noise is gone, there's something else waiting underneath. It's something that doesn't leave. I started hearing it after a while. Not words, not answers, just presence. Something deeper than pain. That's when I realized silence wasn't punishment. It was how I healed. The crowd remained silent, hanging on every syllable. The lighting crew, who usually adjusted the brightness during emotional moments, didn't touch a thing. No one wanted to break what had formed. Will looked up again, his expression unguarded. "You really disappeared?" he asked softly. "Like just left it all behind?" Keanu nodded. "Yeah, I didn't know what else to do. The world kept moving, and I didn't. Sometimes, when everything hurts too much, stopping feels like survival." The words landed with a quiet finality. Helena's throat tightened as she realized this wasn't about celebrity anymore. It was about being human in a world that demands constant noise. Will sat back slowly, his earlier confidence replaced by a reflective stillness. His voice came out low, almost unsure. "So when you disappeared," he asked, "what did that look like?" "What did you do?" Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "Nothing heroic," he said softly. "I woke up one morning and realized I couldn't recognize my own life. Everything felt heavy, even breathing. So I walked away from the noise from premieres, interviews, parties. I stopped pretending I was okay. For months it was just me, a small apartment, and the sound of the city outside my window. The audience listened in absolute silence, the sound of his words echoing like memory. I remember one night," Keanu continued, "I was sitting on the floor, just staring at a candle. I'd lit it without thinking, just because I couldn't stand the dark. And for some reason, that little flame felt like the only thing in the world that made sense. It flickered, it burned quietly, but it never begged for attention. It just existed. I think that's when I understood. Something about peace. It's not loud. It's not triumphant. It's gentle. It asks you to stay." Helena's voice trembled as she spoke. "Stay where?" Keanu looked at her. "Where you are," he said. "Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." The crowd exhaled softly, as though sharing the same realization. Will leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face illuminated by the stage lights. "You mean you didn't do anything to escape it?" Keanu shook his head. "No. I stopped trying to fix it. I let it speak. Pain isn't something you solve. It's something you learn to sit with." The simplicity of the statement pierced deeper than any dramatic confession could have. Will frowned slightly, his eyes glistening. "But what about your career, man? The fans? The people depending on you?" "I thought about them," Keanu said. "But then I realized I was no good to anyone if I was gone inside. People can forgive absence. They can't forgive the version of you that's half alive." That hit Will harder than he expected. He lowered his head, hands clasped together. "Half alive," he whispered. "Yeah, I know that one." Keanu glanced at him with quiet compassion. "You can spend your whole life giving everything away," he said, "and still forget to give yourself what's left." Helena pressed her hand to her chest, visibly moved. Around the studio, people shifted gently, not to leave or move on, but to breathe, as if reminded of something they'd forgotten to feel. Will lifted his eyes again, voice trembling. "And the silence," he said, "it stopped hurting?" Keanu's voice softened even further. "No," he said, "it still hurts. But now, it speaks too." The air in the studio was heavy but sacred, the kind of quiet that made every sound, every breath, feel amplified. Helena didn't speak. She simply looked at Keanu with eyes full of empathy, knowing that what he was sharing wasn't just a story, it was something lived and endured. Will leaned forward slightly, his voice almost a whisper. "You said silence started speaking to you. What did it say?" Keanu gave a small, tired smile. "It told me that grief doesn't go away when you ignore it. It just waits. It waits for you to stop running long enough to be heard. When I finally stopped, I started hearing pieces of myself. I'd forgotten the memories, the laughter, the love that pain tried to bury." The audience sat motionless. The camera operator's hands trembled as he zoomed in on Keanu's face, the studio lights reflecting off his eyes. Keanu continued, his voice soft but strong. "People think healing means forgetting. It doesn't. Healing is remembering without falling apart every time you do." Will looked at him, the words hitting him deeper than he expected. "So you're saying you learned to live with it," he said quietly. Keanu nodded. Yes, I learned that pain doesn't disappear. It transforms. When you stop fighting it, it starts teaching you. It shows you who you are, beneath everything you've built to survive. Will blinked hard, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the truth of that. That's hard, he said softly. To sit with it, to not escape it. Keanu's gaze held him. It's harder to run, he said. Running keeps you tired. Stillness lets you breathe again. The audience exhaled as one. Helena's fingers tightened around her pen, her knuckles white. She felt like she was listening to something holy, something she wasn't supposed to interrupt. Keanu looked down for a moment, then lifted his eyes toward the crowd. When my sister was gone, he said, I thought silence would kill me. But now I know it's where I meet her. Every quiet moment is a doorway. You just have to be still enough to walk through. A single tear rolled down Will's cheek, and he didn't bother to wipe it away. Man, he whispered, I don't know if I've ever been still long enough to meet anyone, especially myself. Keanu gave him a small nod. Then maybe tonight's the start. The crowd didn't move. No one dared to break the silence. For the first time that night, the two men just sat together. No words, no noise, just presence. And in that stillness, something unseen passed between them. Something far greater than the fame that had brought them there. It was understanding. Will sat up slowly, his shoulders tense, his voice carrying a touch of defiance. That's beautiful, man, he said. Really? But I didn't get that choice. I couldn't vanish. I had to show up, face it all, the memes, the judgment, the mistakes. Every time I tried to disappear, someone dragged me back under the lights. The audience murmured softly. They felt the weight in his words, the ache beneath the pride. He wasn't defending his fame anymore. He was defending the pain that came with it. Keanu nodded, his eyes warm but steady. You face the world, he said. I face myself. Both hurt. Will gave a short laugh, bitter and hollow. Yeah, but one gets you applause and the other gets you forgotten. Keanu's voice stayed gentle. Or maybe one just teaches you who's really listening. Will stared at him, then at the crowd. You think they're listening? He asked. Really? Half the time they're waiting for the next scandal, the next viral clip. They don't want truth. They want entertainment. Keanu leaned forward slightly. Maybe they don't know how to tell the difference anymore. The room fell silent again. Will looked down, his thumb rubbing the edge of his chair, restless. You make it sound so easy, he muttered. Like you just wake up one day and decide to be enlightened. But I can't. I've got a family, a name, a reputation. If I stop performing, I disappear. Keanu tilted his head. Maybe disappearing isn't the same as being gone. Will frowned, trying to follow. What's that supposed to mean? Sometimes, you have to lose the version of yourself everyone expects before you can meet the one that's been waiting underneath. The audience inhaled collectively. Helena's hand pressed against her chest. The conversation had moved far beyond celebrity. This was soul talk, disguised as television. Will forced a smirk, though the fight in it was fading. You think I'm performing right now? Keanu smiled faintly. I think you're defending. Will didn't answer. His jaw tightened, eyes flicking toward the audience, searching for validation. But this time, the crowd didn't give him laughter or cheers. They just watched, quietly, waiting. That silence unsettled him more than any judgment could. He looked back at Keanu. You ever get tired of being the calm one? He asked suddenly. The man who always has the right words? Keanu took a breath. All the time. But calm isn't a gift. It's a choice. I have to keep making. Will exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slowly. Yeah, he said softly. And what happens when that choice keeps breaking you? Keanu's answer was simple. Then you rest. You stop trying to win peace, and you let it find you. His face was tense, his voice lower now, but it carried the sharpness of someone wrestling with himself. You talk like peace is a choice you can just reach for, he said. But peace doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't fix your image when the world's tearing it apart. You think stillness would have helped me when every headline made me the punchline? Keanu listened without flinching. Maybe not, he said calmly. Stillness doesn't erase what people say. It just helps you stop letting their words decide who you are. Will exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. You make that sound simple. It's not, Keanu replied. It took me years to realize that people's opinions were just noise. I used to live for approval too. Every role, every compliment, it filled the space for a minute, then vanished. It's a hunger that never stops feeding on you. Will looked at him, eyes narrowed, but his resistance was weakening. So you just stopped caring? Keanu shook his head. I stopped confusing attention for love, the crowd collectively murmured. A woman in the front row put a hand over her mouth. Will's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time, he didn't seem to know how to respond. Helena watched closely. Will, she said softly, you said earlier you couldn't disappear. What did that cost you? He hesitated, then laughed bitterly. Everything I built was public. My family, my mistakes, my apologies. Every time I messed up, it was there forever. And you know what the worst part is? I thought being seen meant being forgiven. Keanu nodded slowly. But it just made you more exposed. Exactly, Will said, his voice cracking. You can't heal when everyone's watching. You can't even think straight. Every move becomes a performance, even when you're just trying to breathe. Keanu leaned closer, his tone softer now. You think I don't understand that? I've lost people under the spotlight too. The world watched me grieve, called it strength, called it mystery. They didn't see the part of me that broke. They saw the silence and mistook it for peace. Will met his eyes again. For once, there was no anger there, just recognition. So both of us got misunderstood, he said quietly. Keanu nodded. The world likes stories. It doesn't always want truth, but we still get to decide what part we play in the story they tell. Will's voice fell to a whisper. And what if the story's already written? Keanu looked at him with a calm that was almost fatherly. Then maybe it's time to write your own ending. Will leaned back in his chair, silent for a long time. The lights above cast a faint halo around him, soft but exposing. His hands clasped together, thumbs fidgeting, betraying the calm he was trying to project. You make it sound easy, he said finally. Just walk away from the noise, rewrite the story, find peace. But I've built my whole life on being seen. What's left if I step out of the light? Keanu's voice was gentle. Maybe what's left is what's real. The audience held their breath. There was no music, no cue, just that line hanging in the air. Will's mouth tightened. You really believe that? He asked. That what's real survives after the lights go out? I know it does, Keanu said. Because when everything else fades, the fame, the applause, the headlines, what's real is what keeps you breathing. The rest is just noise that eventually burns itself out. Will's laugh came quiet, broken. And what if I don't know what's real anymore? Keanu paused, then said, Then you start by sitting still long enough to find out. Helena's eyes glistened, her cue cards forgotten in her lap. The camera zoomed in closer, capturing the unspoken understanding forming between them. The interview had become a mirror that neither man could turn away from. Will looked at Keanu with a mix of defiance and vulnerability. You're saying I'm still acting? Even now? Keanu shook his head slowly. No, I think you're finally stopping. Will let out a shaky breath, glancing at the audience. They came here to laugh, you know. To see me be funny again. To see you be mysterious. Now look at us. Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe this is funnier than we think. Two men learning to stop pretending in front of the one thing that never lies, a camera. Will gave a soft, surprised laugh. Yeah, maybe that's the first honest thing I've done in a long time. The audience didn't laugh. They smiled, quiet and respectful. Something about the moment felt too sacred to break. Keanu leaned forward, his tone still measured, but full of compassion. "You don't have to be anyone else tonight, Will. You don't have to perform peace. Just be in it for a moment." "That's enough." Will looked down at his hands again, the tension in his shoulders melting slowly. "You really believe stillness can fix everything?" "Not fix," Keanu said. "Reveal." That word lingered like a promise. Will looked back up, the smallest flicker of a smile tugging at his lips. "Then maybe tonight's the first time I've let myself be seen for real." Keanu nodded. "And maybe that's all the world ever wanted from you." The audience didn't clap. They just breathed with him. The air in the studio had changed again. What had started as tension and rivalry had become something unrecognizable. Quiet, heavy, alive. No one moved. Even the audience seemed afraid to breathe too loudly, as though any sound might disturb the fragile truth forming in front of them. Will sat there for a moment, staring at Keanu. His expression was unreadable, half defiance, half surrender. Then, finally, his shoulders sagged, and the words slipped out, almost as a whisper. "You know what's crazy?" he said. "I didn't invite you here because I admire you." Helena's eyes widened slightly. The control room froze. The stage lights seemed to hum louder in the silence that followed. Will went on, voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "I wanted to expose you, to make you look human, because I hated how people loved your calm while I was falling apart in public." Gasps rippled across the room. A few audience members instinctively looked at Keanu, waiting for a reaction. He didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He simply looked at Will with a kind of stillness that didn't feel passive. It felt compassionate. Keanu's reply came quiet, almost like a prayer. "And now?" Will exhaled, the weight of years sitting in that single breath. "Now, I think I just exposed myself." The words hung there, suspended between them like confession and forgiveness rolled into one. Helena lowered her cue cards completely, her lips parting slightly as she looked from one man to the other. She didn't dare speak. Will looked down at his hands. "I thought if I brought you here, I could prove something. That your silence wasn't strength, it was just luck. That you didn't have to fight like the rest of us. But I get it now. You weren't running from the world. You were facing something I never had the courage to face." Keanu's voice stayed soft. "Yourself?" Will nodded faintly. "Yeah, myself." He gave a shaky laugh. "You know how long it's been since I talked to anyone without trying to make them like me?" Keanu smiled faintly but warmly. "You're doing it now." Will looked up, and for a split second he looked younger, unguarded, honest. The crowd could feel the shift, the release of something they didn't know they'd been holding in. Helena swallowed hard. Her eyes glistened under the studio lights. She wasn't a host anymore, just a witness. "This," she whispered to herself, "isn't an interview anymore." And she was right. It wasn't. It was something else entirely. Two men, two paths, meeting in the one place where truth could finally breathe in front of the entire world. Will leaned back in his chair, his chest rising and falling slowly. His eyes glistened, and for the first time, there was no mask left to hold on to. "You know what it feels like," he said, voice shaking, "to have the whole world love you one year and hate you the next. I kept thinking if I smiled hard enough, if I kept performing, I could win them back. But the truth is, I wasn't trying to win them. I was trying to win myself." Keanu didn't interrupt. He just sat there, breathing with him, giving him room. Will continued, his tone breaking. "I've spent my whole life building an image. The strong one, the funny one, the guy who never breaks. But that man doesn't exist anymore. And I kept pretending he did because I thought if I stopped, no one would care who was underneath." Keanu's gaze was kind. "But they would," he said quietly, "because the person underneath is real. The one you built isn't." Will let out a hollow laugh, the kind that sounds like the end of holding something too long. "Yeah, real. I forgot what that feels like. I used to think vulnerability was weakness. Now I think it's the only thing that lasts." The audience sat frozen. Some had tears in their eyes, not because it was sad, but because it was so painfully honest. Helena's eyes flicked toward the camera operators, but even they were motionless. No one wanted to break the spell of the moment. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice deep and steady. "You said you wanted to expose me," he said gently, "but maybe what you really wanted was to be seen." Will looked at him, startled by the precision of it. His lips parted, but no sound came. For the first time, there was no denial left, only truth.
"You're right," he whispered. "I didn't even realize it. I've been screaming for years and no one ever heard me. They just laughed."
They clapped. They moved on. But you didn't move. You just listened. Keanu's face softened. Sometimes, silence says more than applause ever can.
Will swallowed hard.
"You ever get tired of being the one who listens?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but I think that's why I'm here tonight. Maybe we were both supposed to hear each other." The lights in the studio dimmed slightly, whether by intention or coincidence, no one knew. The air felt thicker, warmer. It wasn't just a show anymore. It was two human beings speaking for everyone who had ever hidden behind their own performance. Will's eyes shimmered, his voice trembling as he said, "I used to think strength was standing tall when everything around you was falling apart. But now I think it's the opposite. Strength is when you finally admit you're tired." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's where healing starts." The audience stayed utterly silent. Helena had lowered her microphone completely. Her eyes shone as she looked at the two men, realizing she was witnessing something far beyond television, something rare, something holy. Will exhaled, almost whispering. "I wanted to embarrass you tonight," he said. "Instead, I think you helped me forgive myself." Keanu's voice was soft. "That's all any of us can do." Will nodded, blinking rapidly as tears threatened to fall. "You know what's funny?" he said. "All these years, I thought peace was something people earned. But now I see it's just something you stop running from." Keanu smiled again, his voice warm. "Exactly." The crowd didn't clap. They didn't need to. The silence was enough. It was the sound of truth landing quiet, unpolished, and completely human. The lights seemed dimmer now, though no one had touched the controls. The energy in the room had shifted again, deeper, heavier. Will's posture changed, his shoulders slumped. His hands trembled slightly in his lap. His voice cracked as he spoke, no longer performing for anyone. "You don't know what it's like to need the noise," he said. "The applause, the laughter, to feel like you'll disappear without it." Keanu leaned forward, his eyes calm but filled with understanding. "Then maybe disappearing isn't the end," he said gently. "Maybe it's where you begin again." Will laughed, but the sound was bitter, hollow. "You talk like it's easy," he said, shaking his head. "It's not easy," Keanu replied. "It's necessary." Will blinked, his breath unsteady. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't even know who I am when the cameras turn off." Keanu's tone softened, almost tender. "Then it's time to find out." The words hung in the air like a soft bell, echoing through the studio. The audience sat still, unsure if they were supposed to breathe or pray. Will stared at him, his lower lip trembling. "I've been doing this my whole life," he said. "Every smile, every interview, every show, it's all I know. You take that away, and what's left?" Keanu didn't rush to answer. He let the silence stretch until it became its own kind of truth. "What's left," he finally said, "is the part of you that doesn't need to be watched to exist." Will looked down at the floor. "That part doesn't feel real anymore." "It's real," Keanu said softly. "It's just buried under everything you built to survive." Helena watched with her hand over her mouth. Tears were gathering in her eyes, though she tried to hide them. The producers in the control booth had stopped talking. They didn't dare cut to commercial. Something bigger than television was happening. Will's laugh turned into something fragile, almost a sob. "You make it sound like I can just walk out of here and start over." Like I can erase everything. Keanu shook his head. You don't erase it. You face it. Every story, every wound, every mistake, it's still yours. But once you stop running from it, it stops chasing you. Will rubbed at his eyes, trying to hold himself together, but the effort was falling apart. And what if I can't face it? What if it's too much? Keanu leaned closer, voice steady and low. Then, let someone face it with you. Will looked up, his eyes wet, his voice trembling. You really believe that's possible? Yes, Keanu said. Because you're doing it right now. The room was utterly silent. It wasn't a silence of tension anymore. It was one of release. For the first time all night, Will Smith looked small, human, and heartbreakingly sincere. And Keanu's calm didn't feel like detachment anymore. It felt like compassion. Will's hands covered his face, and for a long moment, he didn't move. The silence in the studio was so deep that the sound of a distant camera fan could be heard whirring softly in the background. When he finally lowered his hands, his eyes were red, but there was no shame in them, only exhaustion. You know what it feels like, he said quietly, to be everyone's favorite for a while, and then suddenly no one's? Keanu nodded slowly. I know the emptiness after the applause, he said. It's like walking off a stage into a room where no one's waiting for you. You can hear your own breathing, but it doesn't sound like you. Will exhaled, a hollow sound that carried years of weight. That's it, he said. That's exactly it. I used to think if I worked hard enough, gave enough, entertained enough, I'd feel full again. But it's like drinking salt water. It just makes you thirstier. Keanu's gaze softened. Because applause feeds the image, not the soul. Will looked at him, his voice barely above a whisper. So what feeds the soul then? Presence, Keanu said gently. And forgiveness. Will swallowed hard. Forgiveness? For yourself, Keanu added. For not being perfect, for trying to fill emptiness with noise, for believing that love has to be earned. The audience's collective breath caught. Helena blinked rapidly, unable to look away. She wasn't a host anymore. She was part of the lesson unfolding. Will shook his head slightly. You make it sound like you figured it all out, he said, though his voice lacked its usual sarcasm. Keanu smiled faintly. No one figures it out, he said. You just learn to stop pretending you have to. Will's lip quivered, his voice cracking as he spoke. You know, when I was younger, I used to dream about this life. Spotlights, fame, the world knowing my name. Now I'd give anything for 5 minutes where nobody expects me to smile. Keanu's voice dropped to a near whisper. Then take those 5 minutes. Right now. Will looked up, caught off guard. What do you mean? Right now, Keanu said. You don't owe the world a smile. You don't owe them laughter or lines. You just owe yourself a breath. The crowd was utterly still. Will's eyes darted toward them, then back to Keanu. They're watching, he said weakly. Let them, Keanu said. Maybe they'll learn what real looks like. Will exhaled, slow and trembling. He sat back, closed his eyes for a moment, and for the first time since the show began, he didn't perform. His face was still, his breathing steady. It was small, quiet, but it was the most powerful thing he'd done all night. When he opened his eyes again, the tears were gone. His voice was raw, but clear. I think I've been afraid of silence my whole life, he said. It made me feel invisible. Keanu nodded. That's because silence doesn't see you, it reveals you. Will tilted his head slightly, his expression softening. And if I don't like what it shows? Keanu smiled faintly. Then you start over. You keep looking until you do. Will blinked, the weight of his walls crumbling piece by piece. You really believe that? He whispered. Keanu's eyes didn't waver. I don't just believe it, he said quietly. I live it. The audience stayed silent for several seconds more, completely still, until someone in the back began to softly clap, not out of habit, but reverence. Others joined, not cheering, not shouting, just slow, heartfelt applause. For a moment, that wasn't performance, It was humanity. The silence in the studio had turned into something different now. It wasn't heavy anymore. It felt still, soft, like everyone there was holding the same fragile truth in their hands and afraid to let it fall. Helena glanced around the room, realizing she had never seen anything like this on live television. It wasn't confrontation anymore. It was healing. Will sat quietly, breathing through the weight in his chest. The tension in his shoulders had faded. He looked at Keanu with red-rimmed eyes, his voice low but steady. "You know," he said, "I built a version of me that the world loves. The funny one, the strong one, the man who always has an answer. But somewhere along the way, I stopped loving him." The audience didn't move. Some nodded gently, others blinked away tears. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. Everyone in that room had built a version of themselves once. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes warm but sharp with honesty. "Then maybe it's time," he said softly, "to meet the man behind him." Will let out a breath that sounded more like a sob. His hands shook slightly as he rubbed the back of his neck. "You think he's worth meeting?" Keanu nodded, the smallest smile on his lips. "I think he's been waiting." The line hit Will hard. His throat tightened, and for a long moment, he couldn't speak. Tears began to roll down his face, silent and unhidden. There was no audience, no camera in his mind, just that one sentence echoing in the air between them. Helena turned her mic slightly away, whispering under her breath, though everyone could still hear. "This isn't a talk show anymore. It's a reckoning." Will laughed weakly through his tears, his voice trembling. "You know what's crazy? I thought I came here tonight to control the story. I thought if I could turn the spotlight on you, I'd feel powerful again. But I think all I really wanted was for someone to see me without the act." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then you got what you came for." Will looked down, his voice breaking again. "I don't know who that person is anymore, though. I've been pretending for so long." "Then stop pretending," Keanu said softly. "That's the first step." Will wiped his eyes, his face wet but open. "You make it sound easy." Keanu shook his head. "It's not easy. It's honest, and honesty hurts before it heals." The crowd exhaled together, a quiet, emotional sigh. No one dared to applaud. They knew something sacred was unfolding in front of them, something that didn't belong to entertainment anymore. Will's lips trembled as he whispered, "I don't even remember the last time I talked like this. Not as a star, not as a father, not as a brand. Just me." Keanu's voice was calm, grounding. Then maybe that's who the world needed all along. Not Will Smith, the actor. Just Will. Will sat back, his eyes glassy, his voice trembling as he said, "You really think the world wants that? The real me? The one who's not smiling or joking or fixing everything? 'Cause I'm not sure they'd like him very much." Keanu shook his head slowly. "The world doesn't have to like him," he said. "You do." The words sank deep. Will stared at the floor, silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his tone was softer, almost like he was confessing something to himself. "I used to look in the mirror and see this guy everyone wanted me to be. The charmer, the survivor. But now, when I look, I see a stranger. I've been living in his skin so long, I forgot what mine feels like." Keanu's voice was low and patient. "Then it's time to come home." Will looked up, confused. "Come home?" Keanu nodded. "To yourself, the person you left behind, while chasing the one the world applauded." The sentence hit Will like a punch he hadn't seen coming. His eyes filled again, but this time, he didn't fight it. The tears fell freely, running down his cheeks as his voice cracked. "You make it sound like there's still something left in there worth finding." "There is," Keanu said gently. "Because you're still here. Broken doesn't mean gone. It just means honest." Will covered his face with one hand, the other pressed over his heart. The audience could see it trembling. "I forgot what that feels like," he whispered. Honesty. Keanu smiled softly. It's not something you learn, it's something you remember. Helena's eyes filled with tears as she watched the two men sitting in silence, surrounded by light, yet talking like they were alone in a dark room. She could feel every heart in the audience beating slower, quieter. Will lifted his head again, wiping his face, his voice barely holding together. I've spent so long apologizing for the version of me that breaks. I thought if I just kept giving, if I kept performing, maybe people would forgive the mistakes I couldn't. Keanu leaned forward slightly. You don't have to earn forgiveness, he said. You just have to stop running from it. Will laughed weakly, the sound trembling in the air. You really believe it's that simple? No, Keanu said, but I believe it's worth it. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It felt open, like breathing after holding it too long. Will took another deep breath, his eyes glistening but steady. You know what's strange? He said. For the first time in a long time, I'm not thinking about the cameras. I'm not thinking about what this will look like tomorrow. I'm just here. Keanu nodded. That's presence, the one thing no fame can buy. Helena glanced toward the audience. Some were crying quietly. Others were still, hands clasped together, like they were witnessing a prayer rather than an interview. The studio lights dimmed slightly, and for the first time that night, it wasn't Will Smith, the celebrity on stage. It was just a man seen, heard, and finally understood. Will's eyes were red, but there was no more effort to hide it. The walls that had protected him for decades were gone, and what remained was something fragile and real. He stared ahead for a long time before speaking, his voice trembling under the weight of honesty. You know, he said softly, I missed birthdays. I missed dinners. I missed the quiet stuff that really mattered. I told myself I was building for them, for my family, for my kids. But I wasn't building anything. I was hiding in the work. The words cracked mid-sentence. A few audience members wiped their eyes. They weren't watching a Hollywood legend anymore. They were watching a man finally admit how much his success had cost him. Keanu nodded slowly, his expression calm, filled with empathy that came from a place beyond words. You weren't building a life, he said quietly. You were building a disguise. Will looked down, the truth landing with the precision of a blade, sharp but healing. He took a shaky breath. Yeah, he whispered. A disguise that smiled when I couldn't, that forgave when I was still angry, that kept performing even when I didn't know my lines anymore. Keanu's tone softened further. And maybe that disguise did what it had to do. Maybe it kept you safe long enough to get here. Will blinked, looking up at him again. Safe? He repeated. It didn't feel safe. It felt like I was disappearing piece by piece. Every time I smiled for the cameras, I lost another part of myself. I thought the applause would fill the silence. It didn't. Keanu leaned forward slightly. That's because applause can't reach the places that hurt. Only presence can. Will exhaled hard, as though the truth itself had punched the air out of him. You really think I can forgive myself for that? Keanu's eyes held his with a calm certainty. Forgiveness isn't escape, he said. Slowly, it's staying with the pain, staying with the truth, staying long enough to understand it. Will's face twisted, torn between grief and realization. That sounds hard. It is, Keanu said. It's supposed to be. Forgiveness isn't supposed to erase what happened. It's supposed to remind you that you survived it. Will swallowed, his lips trembling. I don't feel like I survived, he said quietly. I feel like I'm just existing, showing up to the noise, doing what's expected, but I don't feel alive. Keanu took a deep breath, his voice warm and steady. Maybe that's because you've been surviving on applause instead of peace. You've kept everyone else entertained while the man inside you has been waiting for silence. Will looked at him again, his voice barely audible. And if silence still scares me? Keanu gave the faintest smile. Then it's the place you need to visit most. Helena turned slightly away from the camera, brushing a tear from her cheek. The audience remained motionless, hearts heavy, breaths shallow. What had begun as competition had turned into communion. Will rubbed his palms together slowly, staring at the floor like it might offer him answers. His voice broke the silence, raw and uncertain. You know, I used to think the hardest thing in life was failing in front of the world, but it's not. The hardest thing is realizing you failed the people who loved you the most. Keanu nodded slightly, his gaze gentle but unwavering. That's a pain a lot of people carry, he said. We think we're giving them everything by working harder, by becoming stronger. But what they really wanted was us, just us. Will's throat tightened. I thought I was being a good man by providing, by showing up for the image of success. But now I see I wasn't showing up for the moments that actually mattered. His voice cracked again. My daughter used to wait for me at the time. Piano. She'd ask if I could play with her before bed, and I'd tell her, next time. I don't even remember when next time stopped coming. The audience went still again. You could hear soft sniffles from the back rows. Keanu leaned forward slightly. We all miss moments we wish we could get back, he said softly. But maybe forgiveness isn't about changing the past. Maybe it's about not letting it control the next sunrise. Will looked up slowly. You really believe that? That I can start again after all of it? I don't just believe it, Keanu said. I've lived it. I've lost people I love too. I've broken things I can't fix. But you don't honor the people you've hurt by punishing yourself forever. You honor them by becoming someone they would have wanted to stay. Will's lip trembled. And if I'm too late? Keanu shook his head. It's never too late, to be honest. Will nodded, trying to steady himself. You make it sound like forgiveness is a choice. It is, Keanu said gently, but not a single moment. It's a choice you have to make every day you wake up and remember who you've been. Will looked down again, taking a long breath before whispering, I don't know if I can. Keanu tilted his head, voice barely above a whisper. Then just start with trying. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what you did. It means refusing to keep punishing the man who's already learned. That broke something open in the room. Helena pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. The cameramen were still, their eyes glassy. The entire studio seemed to pulse with empathy, every heart feeling what Will was finally saying out loud. Will's voice shook. You make peace sound like something you earn by surviving yourself. Keanu nodded. In a way it is. You don't find peace after the pain. You find it when you stop pretending you're not still hurting. Will's tears came again. This time without resistance. I've spent so long trying to make the world forgive me that I forgot I was the one holding the grudge. Keanu's tone deepened, calm and resonant. Then let it go. Not because the world says it's time, but because your heart's tired of carrying it. Will looked at him, his face soft, vulnerable. You make it sound like I still deserve peace. Keanu nodded gently. You do. Everyone does. Even the ones who've forgotten how to believe it. Will exhaled shakily, a faint, genuine smile breaking through the grief. Then maybe that's where I start. Keanu smiled back. That's exactly where you start. The audience didn't clap. They couldn't. They just sat there in silence, united, moved, and changed by what they had witnessed. Helena wiped the corners of her eyes, trying to compose herself, though her voice trembled. The room was still, yet it felt alive, filled with something greater than applause, something sacred. She looked at Will, her professional poise gone, her tone soft and human. Will, she said quietly, what would you say to the man behind the image? Will froze, the question echoing through the space like a whisper he'd been avoiding for years. His eyes flicked toward the audience, then to the lights above, but he found no escape there. Slowly, his gaze lowered back to Keanu, who waited in silence, not demanding an answer, only offering space. Will's throat tightened. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His lips parted, but only air came out. Then, after a deep breath, the words arrived, small and fragile. I'd say, he began, his voice breaking, I'm sorry I left you behind. No one moved. No one clapped. Even the steady hum of the stage equipment seemed to quiet itself. Keanu's eyes softened. A faint smile crossed his face, not of pride or pity, but of recognition. "That's the beginning," he said gently. Will let out a shaky breath, as though those words had been waiting for decades to leave him. His shoulders slumped forward, but this time, not from defeat, from release. Helena lowered her microphone entirely. There was nothing left to say. The camera stayed on, but the world watching through them was silent. There was no need for sound. Keanu looked at Will, his voice quiet but firm. "You've carried a weight for a long time," he said, saying that's how you set it down. Will nodded, unable to speak. Tears traced down his cheeks, and he didn't wipe them away. The audience was silent, not out of discomfort, but reverence. They understood that something rare was happening, something unpolished, unscripted, real. Keanu leaned back slightly, eyes unfocused, as if remembering something from his own life. "I think we all leave parts of ourselves behind," he said. "The trick is learning to go back and find them before it's too late." Will sniffled, managing a faint, broken smile. "You make it sound like there's still time." Keanu nodded. "There's always time to tell the truth. That's what keeps us alive." Helena looked between them, blinking through tears. "This," she whispered, barely audible to the microphone, "this isn't a show anymore." The audience didn't react. They didn't need to. Every person in that room felt it, the stillness that comes when the noise finally stops, when hearts are louder than words. Will exhaled slowly, voice quiet as a prayer. "You know what's strange? For the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm performing." Keanu smiled softly. "That's because you're not." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was healing. The studio was wrapped in quiet stillness, a silence so deep that even the sound of the cameras adjusting their focus felt too loud. The lights had softened, casting warm shadows that made everything feel more human, less staged. It no longer looked like a talk show set. It looked like a place of reckoning. Will sat there, shoulders heavy, eyes wet but clear. His voice came out as a whisper. "I've said sorry to everyone but myself, to my wife, my kids, my fans, but never to the person inside me who had to keep pretending." He paused, the truth trembling on his lips. "I think he stopped trusting me a long time ago." Keanu nodded slowly, his expression steady and kind. "Then maybe tonight is the night you earn that trust back." Will's jaw tightened. His breathing deepened as he tried to hold himself steady. "How do you start?" he asked softly. "How do you look in the mirror and talk to someone you abandoned?" Keanu's eyes met his. "You don't talk first. You listen. You let the silence do the work. That's where healing begins." The line seemed to settle over the room like a blanket. The audience shifted slightly, not to move, but to feel. Some people were crying silently, their faces illuminated by the soft blue light. Will wiped his cheeks, the motion slow and deliberate. "All my life," he said, "I've been afraid of what happens when the noise stops. But right now, it doesn't feel so bad." Keanu gave a faint, knowing smile. "That's because you're finally hearing yourself again." For a moment, neither spoke. The world felt suspended. Then Will leaned back, closing his eyes. A single tear slid down his cheek, but this one wasn't from regret, it was relief. "You ever wonder," he murmured, "why the world makes so much noise when it's scared?" Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Because silence tells the truth," he said, "and most people aren't ready to hear it." Helena placed her cue cards face down on the desk. Her voice cracked as she spoke, breaking the stillness but not the peace. "This is why people watch you both," she said softly. "Not because you're actors, but because you remind us that even the ones we admire are still trying to find their way home." Will turned to her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Home," he repeated. "I think that's what I've been chasing all along." Keanu nodded. "Then stop running. Let it catch you." For a long moment, there was nothing. No applause. No music. Just two men sitting quietly, their fame stripped away, replaced by something much simpler truth. One of the camera operators lowered his headset and wiped his face. The floor manager, usually the first to cue transitions, stood still, No one dared interrupt. Will looked at Keanu again, his voice soft but sure. You know, I thought coming here would be about proving something. But it turned out to be about forgiving something. Keanu smiled faintly. That's the best kind of surprise. Will nodded, then looked around the studio as if seeing it for the first time. Funny, he said quietly. The place that's always been about noise is where I finally found peace. The audience didn't clap. They didn't need to. They simply sat together in silence, sharing in the rare, sacred moment where two souls, stripped of ego, met in truth. The studio remained still, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. The lights above hummed faintly, reflecting in Will's eyes as he stared across at Keanu. His voice, when it came, was small but sincere. "Can I ask you something?" Keanu nodded gently. "Of course." Will hesitated, searching for the right words. "Why are you always so calm?" The question carried no envy, now only wonder. The man who once tried to expose Keanu was now trying to understand him. Keanu's expression softened, his gaze distant for a moment, as if the answer lived somewhere deep within his past. When he spoke, his tone was slow, almost reverent. "Because I've already lost what I thought I couldn't live without." The words cut through the air like a quiet revelation. Helena's breath caught. The audience leaned forward instinctively, not to hear better, but to feel closer. Will blinked, unsure how to respond. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. There was something in Keanu's delivery, no performance, no embellishment, just truth, raw and heavy. Keanu continued, his voice calm but lined with sorrow. "People think my quiet means peace," he said. "It's really survival. When life takes everything you love, silence becomes your only way to breathe." The studio lights reflected in his eyes as he glanced toward the floor. "But after a while," he said softly, "you learn to live inside that silence. You learn to make friends with it. And when you face the silence of grief, applause sounds different." Will swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Different how?" he asked, his voice cracking. Keanu looked at him again, his tone unchanging. "It doesn't fill you anymore. It just passes through. You start hearing what's real beneath it, the part of yourself that isn't clapping, isn't cheering, just listening." Will's breathing grew shallow, emotion rising from somewhere he couldn't control. "I think I've been living for that noise," he whispered. "For so long that I forgot how to be still." Keanu nodded softly. "Stillness isn't absence," he said. "It's presence, without pretending." Will let out a trembling breath, tears gathering again. "You make it sound like pain never really leaves you." Keanu shook his head gently. "It doesn't, but it changes. It becomes a teacher instead of a cage." Will's voice cracked as he whispered, "I wish I'd learned that sooner." Keanu's eyes softened. "You're learning it now. That's soon enough." The audience sat frozen, eyes glistening, hearts heavy. They weren't witnessing two stars talking. They were watching two men who had both been broken by life, yet chose to keep standing. Will's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Maybe that's why people trust you," he said. "You don't fake your pain." Keanu looked at him quietly. His next words were simple, but they carried more power than any monologue. "And now, neither are you." Will sat still, his eyes glassy but calm. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to win the room. He wasn't performing. He was simply listening. Keanu's words lingered in the air, quiet but eternal. "And now, neither are you." Something shifted behind Will's eyes, as if a curtain had been lifted. He leaned back slowly, taking a deep breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep within his chest. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think strength meant never breaking. But maybe real strength is what happens after you do." Keanu nodded, a faint smile touching his face. "That's when you stop fighting yourself. That's when you start healing." Will's gaze drifted toward the audience, their faces blurred behind the bright stage lights. All these years, he continued, I thought people loved me because I was untouchable. But maybe they were just waiting for me to show I was human. They were, Keanu said quietly, because that's what connects us. Not perfection, humanity. Will exhaled, his shoulders lowering as though a lifelong burden had been lifted. You ever get tired of being everyone's calm? He asked. Like the world keeps handing you their storms because you know how to stand still in the rain? Keanu gave a thoughtful nod. All the time. But I learned something. When you stop trying to calm the storm, you realize you were never supposed to. You were supposed to feel it. Will blinked, letting the truth settle. You've been through so much, he said quietly. Losing people, facing the quiet alone. And yet, you still choose to show up with kindness. Keanu looked down for a moment, then back at him. Because bitterness is easy. It asks for nothing. But compassion, even when you're hurting, that's strength. That's how you keep your soul alive. The crowd remained silent. You could feel the stillness pressing against every wall of the studio. It was no longer a stage. It was a sanctuary. Will's voice wavered as he spoke again. You said silence became survival. I think I'm starting to understand what you meant. Maybe all the noise I made was just my way of trying not to hear the truth. Keanu's voice softened. Sometimes noise is just pain with a microphone. Will let out a quiet laugh through his tears. Yeah, I think I've been on tour for years with that pain. Keanu smiled faintly. Then it's time to step off the stage and listen to the quiet crowd inside you. They've been waiting for their turn. Will nodded slowly. His breathing steadied, his expression peaceful for the first time that night. You know what's strange, he said. All my life, I chased moments like this: applause, attention, validation. But right now, I don't want any of it. I just want this quiet to stay a little longer. Keanu's tone was almost a whisper. That's how you know you've started to heal. Will's eyes met his, glistening but strong. Not the cameras, not the lights, but this moment. When everything stopped pretending. Keanu nodded. That's what truth does. It stops the world long enough for you to hear your own heart again. Helena's voice broke through gently. If the world could feel what's happening right now, she said softly, maybe we'd all be a little quieter. Maybe we'd all learn to listen. No one responded. They didn't have to. The silence was no longer emptiness. It was understanding. It was healing. Helena looked toward Will, her eyes still glistening with emotion. The entire studio seemed to breathe in unison, waiting for what might come next. She lowered her voice to a whisper that carried across the room. Will, she said softly, I think this moment belongs to you. Will hesitated, staring down at his hands for a long second before slowly rising from his seat. There was no swagger, no practiced charm, no hint of the showman who had once lived for the crowd. The applause that usually followed him into every room didn't come this time. The silence was his stage now. He stood tall, taking a breath that felt heavier than words could describe. Then, in a voice stripped of pretense, he spoke. I brought Keanu here tonight to prove something, he said quietly. To prove that he's just a man, that the calm, the grace, the mystery, it's just an act. I thought if I could peel back that mask, maybe I'd feel better about my own. The audience listened in absolute silence. Will's throat tightened, but he pressed on. But tonight, he proved me wrong. He proved that being just a man is enough. His voice broke slightly on the last word. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Not applause, just the sound of hearts breaking and healing at once. Keanu rose from his chair. He didn't rush forward or interrupt. He simply walked over with quiet purpose, the kind of calm that needed no announcement. When he reached Will, he extended a hand not as a gesture for the cameras, but as one human being reaching out to another. Will looked at it for a moment, his lower lip trembling. Then he took it, gripping it firmly, his voice barely holding steady. Maybe it's time. he said, pausing to steady his breath, "that I stop acting like I have it all together." Keanu's reply came softly, each word deliberate. "Then you'll finally start living." The moment stretched long and full. The lights reflected off their joined hands. Two men so different, yet now standing as mirrors of each other. The crowd rose to their feet, not out of excitement, but respect. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was an acknowledgement of truth. Helena wiped her eyes again, whispering through a fragile smile. "I've hosted hundreds of interviews," she said softly, "but I've never seen one turn into something this real." Will looked toward her, then toward the audience, speaking slowly. "Maybe that's what we've all been missing. Real. The world doesn't need more perfect people pretending to be fine. It needs more broken ones, willing to say they're still learning." The audience stayed standing. No clapping yet, just stillness, connection, reverence. Will's breathing steadied as he looked out into the faces before him. "You know," he said, his tone softer than ever, "I've spent my whole life chasing applause. Every movie, every moment, every interview, it was all about proving I was still worth loving. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that love doesn't need an audience." A murmur rippled through the crowd, quiet and full of understanding. Keanu stood beside him, eyes steady, shoulders relaxed. His presence like an anchor in a storm. Will turned toward him, his voice trembling but honest. "You said something earlier that stuck with me. You said silence isn't escape, it's preparation. I think I finally get it. I've been running from silence because I was afraid of what it would tell me, afraid of hearing my own truth." Keanu nodded gently. "And what does it say now?" Will took a deep breath, the kind that shakes you before it steadies you. "It says I don't have to perform anymore. I don't have to be the funny guy, or the strong guy, or the man who always smiles when he's breaking inside. I can just be me." The audience exhaled as one. Some wiped tears quietly. Others clasped their hands together, watching the man they'd known for decades finally let go of the character he'd been trapped inside. Keanu placed a hand on Will's shoulder, not for comfort, but for affirmation. "That's the hardest role you'll ever play," he said softly. "Yourself. No scripts, no edits, no retakes, just truth." Will nodded, his jaw trembling. "And what if the world doesn't like that version of me?" Keanu's voice was steady, almost serene. "Then let them meet him anyway. The world will catch up. It always does when it sees something real." The studio lights dimmed slightly, as if to honor the moment. Helena sat motionless, afraid to interrupt something sacred. Will's eyes lifted again, glancing toward the back of the studio. "For years, I thought I had to earn love," he said quietly. "Through laughter, through success, through control. But love was never something to earn, it was something to return to." He paused, then smiled faintly. "I think I lost my way trying to be unforgettable, and somewhere in that chase, I forgot how to be present." Keanu's eyes softened. "Presence isn't about being remembered," he said. "It's about being real while you're here." The words landed like prayer. Will nodded again, emotion thick in his throat. "You know," he said slowly, "tonight started as a show, but it feels more like a confession. And maybe that's what I needed to stop performing and start confessing." The audience remained silent. No movement, no applause, just hearts opening. Keanu looked at him with quiet pride. "Confession isn't weakness," he said. "It's the beginning of strength." Will smiled through the tears now freely falling. "You've got a way of making pain sound peaceful." Keanu chuckled softly. "It's not peaceful. It just stops being a prison when you stop fighting it." Will nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what growing up really means, learning to sit in the silence and not run." Keanu's tone was gentle. "Exactly, because in that stillness, you find yourself waiting to be met." Will turned to the audience, the man behind the actor fully visible now. "I spent decades trying to entertain the world," he said. "But maybe the real purpose was to finally learn how to understand myself. The audience stood again, not in noise, but in reverence. People wiped tears. Some clasped their hands over their hearts. Helena finally rose, stepping closer, her voice low and filled with awe. "What happened here tonight wasn't an interview," she said softly. "It was truth meeting itself." Keanu glanced at Will, a faint smile crossing his face. "And that," he said, "is what it means to live." Will met his gaze and nodded slowly. "Then I guess," he whispered, "tonight's the first night I really have." The lights dimmed as both men stood side by side, silent but connected. Two souls no longer performing, just being. The camera panned out slowly, capturing the two men still standing side by side as Helena's voice broke the silence. Her tone was low, reverent, and trembling with emotion. "This wasn't an interview," she said. "It was a conversation about what it means to be real." The audience stood motionless, many wiping their eyes. The red on-air light flickered for the final seconds before dimming out. No music played. No flashy outro rolled. Just the faint hum of the studio lights and the sound of two men breathing, no longer actor and guest, but human beings. When the show ended, no one rushed for autographs or photos. Even Helena didn't follow the usual routine of post-show chatter. The crew members stood quietly at their stations, stunned by what they had witnessed. Something sacred had unfolded before their eyes, something that couldn't be edited, rehearsed, or replicated. Later that night, the clip began to circulate online. At first, it was shared by fans who couldn't believe the vulnerability they'd seen on live television. Then it spread beyond film circles, beyond Hollywood, into everyday homes. People weren't talking about drama or celebrity gossip. They were talking about truth. One comment under the video read, "For the first time, Will Smith wasn't performing. He was healing." Another said, "Keanu didn't humble him. He helped him remember who he was." By morning, the clip had been viewed over 50 million times. Every headline carried the same sentiment. A conversation that changed everything. But Keanu said nothing. No tweets, no statements, no press. His silence became the loudest response of all. A still image from the interview went viral. Keanu and Will standing together, hands clasped, eyes glistening under the studio lights. Beneath it, one quote began to circulate endlessly, shared across platforms, etched into thousands of posts, repeated by millions. It read, "The truest strength is to sit in your pain without turning it into performance." It wasn't from a movie or a press statement. It was from the moment that changed them both. The moment when truth replaced applause. News anchors replayed the footage, calling it one of the most honest exchanges ever broadcast. Therapists and motivational speakers referenced it as an example of emotional maturity. Fans created montages with soft piano music behind their handshake. Yet through all the noise, the purity of that moment remained untouched. Keanu was asked for comment days later at an airport. He smiled politely, shook his head, and said only, "The moment spoke for itself." Then he walked away, disappearing into the quiet once more. Will, on the other hand, chose to face it head-on. In a heartfelt post shared days after the interview, he wrote, "I didn't go on that show to find peace, but somehow, peace found me." His words echoed across millions of screens, reshared, quoted, and felt. People didn't see a celebrity anymore. They saw a man finally unmasking himself. In front of the world, the video continued to spread, not as entertainment, but as a mirror. Teachers played it in classrooms. Counselors used it in sessions about authenticity and self-worth. Fans who once cheered for stunts and sound bites now shared it quietly, often writing in the captions, "Watch until the end." Something beautiful happens. For the first time in years, the world didn't see Will Smith, the performer. They saw Will, the person, the man behind the laughter, the pain, the effort to stay liked. And they saw Keanu Reeves not as an enigma, but as the rare soul who could sit in silence and still speak volumes. Helena was later interviewed by a journalist who asked her what it felt like to witness that moment live. She paused before answering. "It felt like watching two masks fall off," she said softly. I've been a journalist for 20 years, but that night reminded me why truth still matters. Because when people stop pretending, that's when humanity shows up. Clips from that interview were replayed everywhere. A single line from Keanu became a quiet anthem for millions. Silence isn't escape. It's preparation. Those words resonated deeply with people who had spent their lives hiding behind noise, behind success, humor, or distraction. Days turned into weeks, but the conversation didn't fade. Podcasts discussed it, writers analyzed it, churches and community groups referenced it. Everyone found a piece of themselves in that hour-long exchange. And though Keanu never commented further, his presence lingered in the collective heart of those who watched. He had reminded the world of something simple, but forgotten that fame, money, and applause mean little when you're not at peace with yourself. Weeks later, a woman from Chicago posted a message that went viral. She wrote, "I watched that interview at 2 a.m. I had planned to end my life that night, but when Keanu said, 'The truest strength is to sit in your pain,' without turning it into performance, I broke down. For the first time, I let myself cry without hiding it. That saved me." Thousands replied with words of comfort and shared stories of their own. The ripple effect was real, and it was human. It wasn't about celebrity. It was about healing. Months later, Will appeared on another show, this time without the usual production lights or audience. When asked how that night changed him, he smiled faintly and said, "That wasn't a talk show. That was a wake-up call. Keanu taught me that silence isn't weakness, it's where truth finally gets a voice." He paused, his expression calm, reflective. We spend so much of our lives trying to control how people see us. But peace comes the moment you stop performing and start listening to others and to yourself. The clip ended there, but those words became a new chapter for him and for many watching. In the end, both men left the stage that night forever changed. Not by fame, not by competition, but by connection. And as the final frame of the video faded to black, a simple reflection appeared on screen. Have you ever hidden behind the version of yourself the world wanted to see? The question lingered, quiet but powerful. Then, in white letters across the screen, the message that followed invited viewers to carry the lesson forward. If you believe real strength comes from honesty, share this incredible story and subscribe for more. The music swelled soft, emotional, hopeful, and the video ended not with applause, but with stillness. Because sometimes, silence says it all.